I have done 30 plus certifications and am here to guide you throughout your certification journey. In this video, we will be covering some important questions of the Microsoft DP-600 exam. You can find the complete PDF of this video and our practice questions through the link down in the description. To the important questions, question 1. You have a fabric workspace named workspace 1 that contains a data flow named data flow 1. Data flow 1 returns 500 rows of data. You need to identify the min and max values for each column in the query results. Which three data view options should you select? Here in this question, we need to identify the min and max values for each column in the query results. As such, the three data view options that we should select are enable column profile, show column profile in details pane, and enable details pane. Thus, the correct options are B, C, and E. About the options B, this needs to be enabled to be able to select, and E, this needs to be enabled to be able to see the output of C. Question 2. You have a Fabric tenant that contains customer churn data stored as Parquet files in a OneLake. The data contains details about customer demographics and product usage. You create a Fabric notebook to read the data into a Spark data frame. You then create column charts in the notebook that show the distribution of retained customers as compared to lost customers based on geography, the number of products purchased, age, and customer tenure. Which type of analytics are you performing? Here in this question, based on the above stated scenario, we are performing descriptive analytics. Thus, the correct option is B. Descriptive analytics tells what happened in the past, presenting it as numbers and visuals in reports and dashboards. Given the scenario in the question where data is read into a Spark data frame and column charts are created to show the distribution of retained customers compared to lost customers based on various factors, this falls under the definition of descriptive analytics. No future predictions or prescriptions are made, nor are reasons for the past events provided. Final answer, the type of analytics being performed in the scenario described is descriptive analytics. Question 3. You have a Fabric tenant that contains JSON files in OneLake. The files have 1 billion items. You plan to perform time series analysis of the items. You need to transform the data, visualize the data to find insights, perform anomaly detection, and share the insights with the other business users. The solution must meet the following requirements: use parallel processing, minimize the duplication of data, minimize how long it takes to load the data. What should you use to transform and visualize the data? Here in this question, based on the given requirements, we should use the PySpark library in a Fabric notebook to transform and visualize the data. And visualize the data. Thus, the correct option is A. Question 4. You have a Microsoft Power BI semantic model that contains measures. The measures use multiple calculate functions and a filter function. You are evaluating the performance of the measures. In which use case will replacing the filter function with the keep filters function reduce execution time? Here in this question, the case in which replacing the filter function with the keep filters function will reduce execution time is when the filter function uses a nested calculate function. Thus, the correct option is A. The filter function index filters a table to the rows that meet the condition provided in its arguments. When filter is used within a calculate function, it typically modifies the context in which the calculation is performed. If filter uses a nested calculate function, it creates a context transition. Using keep filters in this scenario can improve performance by modifying the behavior of context transition to ensure that existing filters on a table are not unintentionally removed or overridden, which can otherwise increase the complexity and computational load of the query. Question 5. You have a custom Direct Lake semantic model named Model 1 that has 1 billion rows of data. You use Tabular Editor to connect to Model 1 by using the XMLA endpoint. You need to ensure that when users interact with reports based on Model 1, their queries always use Direct Lake mode. What should you do? Here in this question, we have to ensure that when users interact with reports based on Model 1, their queries always use Direct Lake mode. As such, we should, from Model, configure the Direct Lake behavior option. Thus, the correct option is D. The Direct Lake behavior property can be configured by using Tabular Object Model or Tabular Model scripting language. Question 6. You have a fabric tenant that contains a semantic model. The model contains 15 tables. You need to programmatically change each column that ends in the word key to meet the following requirements. Hide the column, set nullable to false, set summarize by to none, set available in MDX to false, mark the column as a key column. What should you use? Here in this question, in order to meet the given requirements, we should use Tabular Editor. Thus, the correct option is C. Tabular Editor allows you to use C# scripts to automate these changes. In PBI Desktop, you can do this manually. Question 7. You have a Microsoft Power BI semantic model. You need to identify any surrogate key columns in the model that have the summarize by property set to a value other than to none. The solution must minimize effort. What should you use? Here in this question, we need to identify any surrogate key columns in the model that have the summarize by property set to a value other than to none while minimizing effort. As such, we should use best practice analyzer in tabular editor. Thus, the correct option is D. Best practice analyzer should be able to identify these with some rules. The question is about identifying, not changing. So, answer is D. Question 8. You have a fabric tenant. You plan to create a data pipeline named Pipeline 1. Pipeline 1 will include two activities that will execute in sequence. You need to ensure that a failure of the first activity will not block the second activity. Which conditional path should you configure between the first activity and the second activity? Here in this question, we need to ensure that a failure of the first activity will not block the second activity. As such, the conditional path that we should configure between the first activity and the second activity is upon completion. Thus, the correct option is B. Question 9. You have a fabric tenant that contains a warehouse. You are designing a star schema model that will contain a customer dimension. The customer dimension table will be a type 2 slowly changing dimension. You need to recommend which columns to add to the table. The columns must not already exist in the source. Which three types of columns should you recommend? Here in this question, we need to recommend which columns to add to our type 2 SCD table. The columns must not already exist in the source. As such, the three types of column that we should recommend are an effective end date and time, a surrogate key, and effective start date and time. Thus, the correct options are C, D, and E. Surrogate keys are typically used in dimension tables rather than fact tables. In a data warehouse, a surrogate key is a unique identifier assigned to each record in a dimension table, usually for internal processing and joining purposes. It provides a stable reference to the dimension record regardless of any changes in the natural key or other attributes. Question 10. You have a fabric tenant that contains two workspaces named Workspace 1 and Workspace 2. Workspace 1 contains a lakehouse named Lakehouse 1. Workspace 2 contains a lakehouse named Lakehouse 2. Lakehouse 1 contains a table named dbo.sales. Lakehouse 2 contains a table named dbo.customers. You need to ensure that you can write queries that reference both dbo.sales and dbo.customers in the same SQL query without making additional copies of the tables. What should you use? Here in this question, we need to ensure that we can write queries that reference both dbo.sales and dbo.customers in the same SQL query without making additional copies of the tables. As such, we could use a view. Thus, the correct option is C. A view is a virtual table that contains data from one or more tables. You can create a view that references tables from different lakehouses. In this case, dbo.sales from lakehouse 1 and dbo.customers from lakehouse 2. Question 11. You have a fabric tenant. You are creating an Azure Data Factory pipeline. You have a stored procedure that returns the number of active customers and their average sales for the current month. You need to add an activity that will execute the stored procedure in a warehouse. The returned values must be available to the downstream activities of the pipeline. Which type of activity should you add? Here in this question, we need to add an activity that will execute the stored procedure in a warehouse. The returned values must be available to the downstream activities of the pipeline. As such, the activity that we should add is lookup. Thus, the correct option is D. Question 12. You have a fabric tenant that contains a lakehouse named Lakehouse 1. You need to prevent new tables added to Lakehouse 1 from being added automatically to the default semantic model of the lakehouse. What should you configure? Here in this question, we need to prevent new tables added to Lakehouse 1 from being added automatically to the default semantic model of the Lakehouse. As such, we should configure the SQL Analytics endpoint settings. Thus, the correct option is A. Manually enable the sync the default Power BI semantic model setting for each warehouse or SQL Analytics endpoint in the workspace. Question 13. You have a fabric tenant that contains a warehouse named Warehouse 1. Warehouse 1 contains two schemas named Schema 1 and Schema 2 and a table named schema1.city. You need to make a copy of schema1.city in Schema 2. The solution must minimize the copying of data. Which PSQL statement should you run? Here in this question, we need to make a copy of schema1.city in schema 2 while minimizing the copying of data. As such, the TSQL statement that we should run is create table schema2.city as clone of schema1.city. Thus, the correct option is C. Question 14. You have a fabric tenant that contains a lakehouse named Lakehouse 1. Lakehouse 1 contains a delta table that has 1 million parquet files. You need to remove files that were not referenced by the table during the past 30 days. The solution must ensure that the transaction log remains consistent and the passage properties of the table are maintained. What should you do? Here in this question, we need to remove files that were not referenced by the table during the past 30 days and ensure that the transaction log remains consistent and the ACID properties of the table are maintained. As such, we should run the vacuum command. Thus, the correct option is D. To remove files from a delta table that are no longer referenced by the current version of the table, run the vacuum command. Question 15. You have a fabric tenant that contains a lakehouse. You plan to use a visual query to merge two tables. You need to ensure that the query returns all the rows in both tables. Which type of join should you use? Here in this question, we need to ensure that the query returns all the rows in both tables. As such, the type of join that we should use is full outer. Thus, the correct option is B. Question 16. You have a fabric workspace named Workspace 1 that contains a lakehouse named Lakehouse 1. In Workspace 1, you create a data pipeline named Pipeline 1. You have CSV files stored in an Azure storage account. You need to add an activity to Pipeline 1 that will copy data from the CSV files to Lakehouse 1. The activity must support Power Query M formula language expressions. Which type of activity should you add? Here in this question, we need to add an activity to pipeline 1 that will copy data from the CSV files to Lakehouse 1 and must support Power Query M formula language expressions. As such, we should add data flow. Thus, the correct option is A. Question 17. You have a fabric tenant that contains a lakehouse named Lakehouse 1. Lakehouse 1 contains a delta table named customer. When you query customer, you discover that the query is slow to execute. You suspect that maintenance was not performed on the table. you need to identify whether maintenance tasks were performed on customer. Solution. You run the following Spark SQL statement. Describe history customer. Does this meet the goal? Here in this question, we need to identify whether maintenance tasks were performed on customer. Based on this requirement, the given solution is indeed correct. As such, the correct option is A. Question 18. You need to create a data loading pattern for a type 1 slowly changing dimension. Which two actions should you include in the process? Here in this question, we need to create a data loading pattern for a type 1 SCD. As such, the two actions that we should include in the process are updating rows when the non-key attributes have changed and inserting new records when the natural key is a new value in the table. Thus, the correct options are A and D. AD is for CD1 while BC is for SCD2. AD makes sense given the type of SCD as no history is maintained and any updates on the columns are taken care of by replacing the values then and there. AD. Other options do not concern SCD type 1 but SCD type 2. Question 19. You have a fabric tenant that contains a data pipeline. You need to ensure that the pipeline runs every 4 hours on Mondays and Fridays. To what should you set repeat for the schedule? Here in this question, we need to ensure that the pipeline runs every 4 hours on Mondays and Fridays. As such, we could set weekly repeat for the schedule. Thus, the correct option is C. The only way to do this is to set the schedule to weekly. Set the days on Monday and Friday and add manually 6 times of 4-hour intervals. Question 20. You have source data in a folder on a local computer. You need to create a solution that will use Fabric to populate a data store. The solution must meet the following requirements. Support the use of data flows to load and append data to the data store. Ensure that delta tables are V-order optimized and compacted automatically. Which type of data store should you use? Here in this question, we need to create a solution that will use Fabric to populate our data store while meeting the given requirements. As such, we should use Lakehouse. Thus, the correct option is A. To meet the requirements of supporting data flows to load and append data to the data store while ensuring that delta tables are V-order optimized and compacted automatically, use a lakehouse in Fabric as your solution. Question 21. You have a fabric tenant that contains a lakehouse named Lakehouse 1. Lakehouse 1 contains an unpartitioned table named Table 1. You plan to copy data to Table 1 and partition the table based on a date column in the source data. You create a copy activity to copy the data to Table 1. You need to specify the partition column in the destination settings of the copy activity. What should you do first? Here in this question, we need to specify the partition column in the destination settings of the copy activity. As such, we should first, from the destination tabs, set mode to override. Thus, the correct option is D. When setting up the copy activity, you need to choose the overwrite mode to make the partition option appear. Question 22. You have a fabric tenant that contains a lakehouse named Lakehouse 1. Lakehouse 1 contains a subfolder named Subfolder 1 that contains CSV files. You need to convert the CSV files into the Delta format that has V-order optimization enabled. What should you do? From Lakehouse Explorer. Here in this question, we need to convert the CSV files into the Delta format that has reorder optimization enabled. As such, from Lakehouse Explorer, we should use the load to tables feature. Thus, the correct option is A. With load to tables, tables are always loaded using the Delta Lake table format with V-order optimization enabled. Question 23. You have a fabric tenant that contains a lakehouse. You plan to query sales data files by using the SQL endpoint. The files will be in an Amazon Simple Storage Service storage bucket. You need to recommend which file format to use and where to create a shortcut. Which two actions should you include in the recommendation? Here in this question, based on the given scenario, the two actions that we should include in the recommendation are use the barcode format and create a shortcut in the tables section. Thus, the correct option is B and D. About the options, B. You should use a columnar file format such as Parquet or ORC. These formats are highly optimized for analytical queries and provide efficient storage and query performance. About D, in the tables section of your lakehouse, you define virtual tables that represent external data sources. These virtual tables can be built by data stored externally in formats such as Parquet or ORC in Amazon S3. Version 24. You have a fabric tenant that contains a semantic model. You need to prevent report creators from populating visuals by using implicit methods. What are two tools that you can use to achieve the goal? Here in this question, we need to prevent report creators from populating visuals by using implicit measures. As such, the two tools that we should use are Microsoft Power BI Desktop and Tabular Editor. Thus, the correct options are A and B. Microsoft Power BI Desktop and Tabular Editor are your go-to for creating explicit measures. Question 25. You have a fabric tenant that contains a semantic model. The model uses direct lake mode. You suspect that some DAX queries hold unnecessary columns into memory. You need to identify the frequently used columns that are loaded into memory. What are two ways to achieve the goal? Here in this question, we need to identify the frequently used columns that are loaded into memory. As such, the two ways to achieve this goal are use the Vertipack Analyzer tool and query the $system.discover underscore storage underscore table underscore column underscore segments dynamic management view. Thus, the correct options are B and C. Question 26. You have a fabric tenant that contains a complex semantic model. This model is based on a star schema and contains many tables, including a fact table named sales. You need to create a diagram of the model. The diagram must contain only the sales table and related tables. What should you use from Microsoft Power BI Desktop? Here in this question, we need to create a diagram of the model, and the diagram must contain only the sales table and related tables. As such, we could use model view from Microsoft Power BI desktop. Thus, the correct option is C. In the model view, it is possible to analyze the semantic model and create new layouts. Question 27. You have a fabric tenant that contains a warehouse. The warehouse uses row level security. You create a direct lake semantic model that uses the delta tables and RLS of the warehouse. When the users interact with a report built from the model, which mode will be used by the DAX queries? Here in this question, when users interact with a report built from the model, the direct query mode will be used by the DAX queries. Thus, the correct option is A. Row level security only applies to queries on a warehouse or SQL Analytics endpoint in Fabric. Power BI queries on a warehouse in direct lake mode will fall back to direct query mode to abide by row level security. When users interact with a report built from a direct lake semantic model, which leverages row level security and delta tables from a warehouse, the DAX queries will operate in direct query mode. Question 28. You have a Fabric tenant that uses a Microsoft Power BI premium capacity. You need to enable scale out for a semantic model. What should you do first? In this question, we need to enable scale out for a semantic model. As such, we should, at the semantic model level, set large dataset storage format to on. Thus, the correct option is C. Question 29. You are creating a semantic model in Microsoft Power BI Desktop. You plan to make bulk changes to the model by using the Tabular Model Definition Language extension for Microsoft Visual Studio Code. You need to save the semantic model to a file. Which file format should you use? Here in this question, to save the semantic model to a file, we should use the PBIT file format. Thus, the correct option is A. The pbib will create one file and two folders. pbib.dataset contains definition folder that is used to host the .tmdl files. Question 30. You have a Fabric tenant named tenant1 that contains a workspace named WS1. WS1 uses a capacity named C1 and contains a dataset named DS1. You need to ensure read-write access to DS1 is available by using XMLA endpoint. What should be modified first? Here in this question, based on the given requirements, we should first modify the C1 settings. Thus, the correct option is C. These were all the questions for this video. You can find the complete PDF of this video and our practice questions through the link down in the description. We will be publishing more parts to this series in the future, so please make sure to subscribe our channel and press the bell icon. Thank you for watching and stay tuned.